Hi, this is Stone Magician 99, also known as Stray Elf on Xbox Live and Stone Magician 99 on Steam. And this is my second developer interview. And this one, I have a very special guest. It's a person whose, uh, in my opinion, best game made up my very first Let's Play on this channel. Uh, this is Craig Hubbard, now of BlackPowder Games, formerly of Monolith Productions, where he was the writer and director of No One Lives Forever and its sequel, as well as the original Fear. And now he's the writer and director at BlackPowder Games, and his most recent project is obviously Betrayal, the black and white survival horror shooter, basically. Um, yeah, uh, thanks for agreeing to this. Um, so yeah, and I guess I'll just get started with the questions.
Sure.
Um, First one is, I know that you probably weren't the art director on the project, but since the art has so much is like such a distinctive and important part of the game, I assume you had a hand in the decision. Why did you choose to go basically all black and white instead of color, and what advantages did that have over um, going into a full color palette?
So we actually started in full color, but I saw a photograph. It was kind of a high contrast photo of a forest scene, and I thought it looked really cool. So I don't really know what I'm doing with post processing, so I just started playing around with the values. And the way I tend to experiment is to kind of go to the extremes, like high and low, and kind of see what the range is, and then start dialing in the middle somewhere. And it just so happened that by chance I stumbled on that super high contrast look. And at first it was just kind of a novelty. It really reminded me of the India ink sketches of Frank Frazetta, whose art books I had as a kid and I always loved. Like it looked like pen and ink. So I was playing around with it on my own, just sort of enjoying the novelty of it. But the more I played it, the more I realized that it really added a lot of tension to the experience. It's it's hard to resolve what you're seeing immediately when it's that extreme, which in some ways is a little daunting, but in other ways is really compelling because you find your brain is working harder to understand, which is just more intense. So eventually I showed it to the team, and we were all very concerned about it because it's very extreme. It's very non-traditional, but at the same time, it was so different that it really felt like an opportunity that we didn't want to miss out on. So we kept developing it and playing around with it, and that's sort of how it came to be.
Uh, yeah, I'm a big fan of the movie Sin City, and that's what it kind of and Schindler's List. So that's what it kind of reminded me of,
Hmm.
especially with the use of red being the main only color. And I do agree that it all being black and white, since the enemies are also black and white, it does pretty much add, like, even if you see even the tiniest thing moving that doesn't look like it's a thing of grass or a tree, it really does make it feel like you're surrounded, even though you might, not be.
Yeah.
So no, I think it worked. And but I know the community is also very happy that you agreed to put in the slider so that they could play like it would look in real life if they wanted to.
You're right.
Um,
So initially, when we first got it in, the post processing that we had was very rigid, and it didn't allow. If we had been able to do that from the start, we would have, because it sort of uh, mitigated our fears of it being a little too off-putting for some people. So we were
Yeah.
glad when Wes is our back when we had titles, he was our technical art director, but he optimized the shader and in the process figured out a way to allow for the scaling of the contrast and the color. So that was cool.
Yeah, it is. And it is really fun to like just since you can go into the options and like the you can still see the game in the background. It is kind of cool to just fiddle with the slider and just see the entire thing change from black and white to color
Yeah,
as you just slide it
we
around.
love that. I'm a huge fan of in the original Far Cry they had post-processing options so you could change the look of the game, and I always love that. It's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
been in every design document I've written since, but this is the first time we've actually been able to do it.
Um, yeah. Um, Now the next question. I don't is the majority of this isn't the entire question, but is the majority or the entirety of your new company from Monolith Productions?
Well, technically, we're all from Monolith Productions. Some of us have been there since it was an independent company, and then a few others were there after it was acquired by Warner Brothers, but it was still called Monolith at that point, so we're all Monolith people.
Okay. What were the what do you find are the advantages or disadvantages of working with I think it's a 6 or 7 person team that you have now instead of a one that's maybe 100 or more?
Well, I've only worked on the only 100 or more team I worked on was with Fear 2 when the whole company kind of pitched
Oh,
in to
okay.
help out.
Yeah, I know Monolith, even when it like when you were there, it was still like a really, really small AAA studio.
Yeah, we always
But
considered ourselves double A because we knew the budgets of our competitors and ours were usually about half. But yeah, so I'm more used to like the 25 to 40 range sort of team, which is I really like that team size. It it's enough that you can do a lot, but at the same time it's not too hard to manage. With so Black Powder is 6 full-time developers, and then we've got a friend helping us out with animation part-time. And the main advantage is just the flexibility. Like there's no meeting. Oh, we meet once a week just to kind of catch up, but it's really lean and efficient. The disadvantage is you can't delegate, which is kind of sad, but
yeah,
it's a lot of work. It was really hard, and I think we were a little too ambitious with this project, so we ended up working on it longer than we were hoping to. But this we like a challenge.
yeah. Um, okay, so other than other than the option to add color, um, like were there any features of the before you released it in early access? Were there any features of like major features of like the pre-alpha stage before you released it on early access that got cut out?
We didn't really cut. There's a lot of stuff that got added, but I don't remember us cutting anything. Yeah, I can't really think of anything. I mean, there's been some scope adjustments and all that, which is normal for any project, but mostly we just added stuff.
Okay. Um, and it is kind of rare that video games are like like there are plenty of video games that are inspired by real world events, but none that are really like really based on it. And I know it's not, and it just really reminded me. I think I remember reading it somewhere on the Steam forums of your game that you were inspired by the Roanoke colony. Um, I don't know. I don't know if that's a correct memory or not, but that's what it really, really reminded me of. So basically, what inspired the idea behind like the story and the setting?
Well, like with just about anything we do, I think it was a lot of components sort of contributing. So early on, we had a lot of discussions about what we thought we could pull off with such a small team, and we kind of figured out we could do a wilderness environment a lot easier than doing a detailed modern urban environment, for example, because it's just the number of assets you need to pull that off. So we also talked about our arsenal. We figured it was going to have to be small. So we talked about, well, maybe we do something like a bow that requires more skill and it gives you a sense of mastery over the course of the game versus an automatic weapon that you can just be really efficient with right away. So a lot of those little discussions, and then thinking in terms of a premise. We don't have a dedicated character artist, so we knew that we were going to have to be creative there. So we came up with this concept of some sort of an abandoned settlement or colony. And then one our David Longo, who's again when we had titles was our art director, and we're all generalists now. We all do lots of different things, but he's the one that told me about Roanoke, which I had heard of vaguely, but I didn't really know much about. So I started researching that. And so we, over the course of doing that research, we ended up moving the game 100 years earlier than we were originally thinking, and kind of using Roanoke and Jamestown and Popham Colony as sort of an inspiration. Because it's a really interesting time period that I didn't know anything about. And it's a very international time period too, which we thought was interesting. There's so many different countries competing for control of land in the New World that it just creates a great sort of set of components for conflict.
Which can get pretty out of control, as anyone who's played the game can see in the aftermath of what's left of some of the
Yeah,
enemies.
well, we
Um,
certainly we went very supernatural with everything, but there's a lot of untapped potential there with other countries coming into the picture.
yeah, yeah. Um, so how did obviously you were the writer and director on No One Lives Forever and its sequel, which were like really like basically like spoofs of 70s and 80s like spy and action movies with a sense of humor. Um, and Fear, which was pretty much the exact polar opposite. um, like really dark and like washed out and gritty and gory and stuff. How did how did your experience making those triple or double A games influence how you made this one?
You know, it all is every project you make a lot of mistakes and you learn a lot of things that you didn't know before and you figure out ways that you could have done things better. So I think everything like Shogo is where I started as a game designer, and that was just a litany of mistakes. So it really taught us a lot of valuable things. It's also where we kind of became really concerned about game length, which has been a curse that we've suffered ever since. Where we want to make sure consumers get enough value for their money. So sometimes we overextend ourselves, which is, you know, problematic. But in any case, so I think like with Fear in particular, that was a case where I had mapped out too much of the story before we really got into development. It was new team, new technology. It was new IP. There were just too many variables for me to have locked down story components that early. So what ended up happening, as you know, now it seems obvious in hindsight, is that there was no way to pull off everything that I had mapped out. So it ended up having to get chopped up quite a bit. And so we you know that always happens. So you've always got to be kind of flexible and adjust. But I think in that case, we just got locked down to too many things that it would have been nice to just take off the table and start fresh. So with this project, especially knowing how limited we are in terms of resources, we really had to stay a lot more flexible with that. So we had the premise kind of figured out early on, but there was a lot of iteration and a lot of revision that, you know, on this project wasn't painful because it was expected, whereas on Fear it was kind of painful.
Yeah, I kind of compare it to Joss Whedon's career going from The Avengers, which is like a huge AAA thing, to going to his movie adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing, which featured a bunch of actors, none of whom got paid anything, and he had to do pretty much everything himself.
Hmm.
So I just kind of compare it to that, like going from something really big. Well, Fear wasn't really big, but comparatively to something that's like microscopic.
Yep.
um, and So this question might seem obvious, but were there any since Betrayer is your first game, what were there any other ideas for what you would do that would be like substantially different before you settled on this idea?
Absolutely. We originally, in the very early days, we had all our options on the table, so we considered talking to publishers. Everybody at that time wanted free to play games, which we really have very little interest in. So we ended up deciding, okay, well, let's see what we can do on our own. And we considered mobile. We considered different genres. I'm a huge Diablo 2 fan, and at the time when we were starting, it was before a lot of the new wave of Diablo style games had really hit. So Diablo 3 wasn't out yet. So we considered that, but it just again with the small team and trying to do a completely new genre that we'd never learned all the mistakes from, it just seemed too risky. Plus, I think fundamentally first person games are my favorite, so it was really easy to come back to the decision to do something first person.
Yeah, that's pretty much the reason why. Part of the reason why I chose this. Like on my channel, you obviously don't know, but anyone watching it will. I pretty much I play only FPS games
Mm.
for my channel, so it's just the genre that I've played the most and I know the most about. So it makes it easy. Also makes it easier for me to come up with questions.
Yeah.
Um, and one thing that has gotten both praise and criticism is the enemies and the like obviously you with the patch that we're recording this on Tuesday, uh, April 1st, and I think the day before this you just put out an update that addressed some of these difficulty issues.
Right.
Well, not issues, but like
I
things
think
that people
issues
had.
is a fine word. So for some
Um,
people it's an issue, and I think that makes it a legitimate issue. So
but like your enemies, they're not particularly like the AI is obviously like way not anywhere near Fear's league, but they are very very relentless. Like they'll follow you all the way across the map if you let them. And
if they keep line of sight to you, they'll stay after you.
and also if you die before the update, you would lose all of your money, and if you die again after that before getting it, you're basically starting over. Um, like how what would you say to in response to the some of the criticism and even from some of the few critics that have actually reviewed the game about how its difficulty is kind of high?
I think that's always a developer problem. I think that you play the game every day and you get really good at it.
Yeah.
So I kept making the game harder because to me it felt trivially easy at a certain point. And there were other people on the team that were saying this is too hard, so I tried to moderate it, but at the same time you want to make sure people get a decent challenge from the game. And I think this is a case where being a really small company kind of you have to be extra careful, which is lesson learned. But in the past, we've had a playtest lab. We can go and watch people play the game, and you can just see people suffering and go, okay, this is too much. We need to do something about this. Whereas here, all we have is being on early access was really helpful, but at the same
Yeah.
time, you're not watching these people play, and you've only got people self-reporting, so you don't hear from the people that are suffering necessarily because they just stop playing and maybe they don't post anything. So I think it's after the game comes out, it's pretty clear. Okay, we should have added some more difficulty settings, and so we've been doing that.
Um, okay, and in while I'm looking at this right now, quite a few of my questions are pretty similar, so I've skipped a few of them. But one thing that I don't know whether you'll be able to answer right away, but what does the what are your plans for either Betrayer or future projects that you're thinking of right now? And are there any plans for like additional content of Betrayer, or are you just going to be focusing on perfecting what you have now?
So there's a lot of discussion going on, but I wouldn't say we have any plans for anything yet. There's a lot of ideas, and we're pretty reticent to talk about stuff we aren't definite on because we've seen how that backfires. But I will say that Betrayer is so we have sort of a long-term goal, which is a style of game that we want to make, which is this style of game where it's much more player-driven, it's much more exploration-based, less linear, less sort of corridor shooter style game. So we have some pretty grand ambitions that there's no way that we can do with such a small crew. So kind of taking an iterative approach and sort of a foundational approach, like Betrayer is sort of a first step in that direction that we can build on, and then hopefully we can go from there and eventually build some pretty big games.
Yeah. Um, okay. Yeah, I didn't really expect anything like our next game will be X,
Yeah.
but that's but that is yeah, that is what I wanted to know. Like, so you are basically just improving this, and maybe after you improve this, then I'm guessing you'd be focused on something else, like either additional stuff or a whole nother thing. But you just want to get this right, basically,
Well, and
completely.
yeah, initially we just want to make sure everybody who bought the game is having a solid experience with it. So we're
Yeah,
trying to track down any remaining major issues and get those resolved. But part of that is making sure that they feel like they got their value for their money, and so we're looking at things that we can do in that regard. But again, I until anything's definite, it's just a possibility.
yeah, and this is kind of a sort of a joke question, which I guess is fitting considering the day in which I'm recording this. Uh, both of your previous two games have had little girls that wear red as their main, as pretty much the main characters. Uh, is that a thing?
It wasn't a at first. I don't think it was a deliberate thing, but there is something. I guess it is kind of a motif at this point. Yeah, I don't know where that comes from. Some childhood trauma or something. I don't know, but
Yeah, I honestly just figured when I first saw it, I figured it might have been like an homage.
there is a little bit of that. I mean, there are definitely some thematic. Yeah, I've sort of mentioned before that as we were finishing Fear, I had a lot of regrets, a lot of missed opportunities that I saw, and so I've sort of harbored those for years and have wanted to sort of secretly fantasized about George Lucas in the game and going back and making it the game that it could have been. But of course, that I'd never actually do that because it's a huge waste of time in a lot of ways. But there are those thematic elements that I felt like we missed the opportunity and wanted to try it again. I mean, Betrayer's not really the format for that because it's such a small and uh, it's focused on other things than that. But at least the foundation is there if we want to develop it further.
Yeah, it kind of like Irrational is going through the same thing it's where they've basically shrunk down from a giant studio to something that's basically Ken Levine has said the exact same thing, going to like exploration, like really replayable, story-driven experiences, which basically is kind of like what you set out to do with this, I guess. Um, but yeah, that was my last question.
Oh, okay.
So, um, so yeah, you can get Betrayer. Now it's on Steam for $20, I think.
Yeah.
Um, or you can get it straight from the developer's website and make sure they get 100% of the profit instead of whatever percent that Valve takes away. I don't remember what it is. I've looked it up, um, but so yeah, thank honestly, thanks for doing this. I initially wasn't confident that I'd be able to get you on here because honestly, you're I honestly thought you were too prestigious to talk to some
Too prestigious.
random. Well,
I'm
I don't
just a
know. Like,
guy.
no, I know, but it's like you've made a lot of. Honestly, like the last interview is from a company making their very, very, very first game,
Mhm.
so they were doing that. But honestly, like I guess with the independent thing, I should probably have expected something slightly different.
Well,
But
I think now you're not dealing with the wall of corporate PR
yeah, exactly.
guardianship. So,
And I have to, and honestly, in this video, I have to say that Larry and your CEO and Trisha Gray, I think,
mhm.
who's your PR person, they've been like, if every publisher had this level of public relations management, I think the industry would be quite different from from what it is now. They responded to literally every single email that I sent, sometimes within minutes. So that was I have to give them credit for being really, really helpful. Um, but yeah, thanks for honestly, thanks for doing this, and I eagerly look forward to any improvements to this and future projects that you work on. So yeah, thanks for doing this, and good luck with whatever you're doing next.
Great. Thank you so much.